Coming up on Extraordinary Faith, we wrap up our 4-part visit to England with an excursion to a small gem of a parish near Oxford that has embraced traditional Catholic worship. We'll learn about the Association for Latin Liturgy and its publications. We'll talk with the nuns at London's historic Tyburn Convent, where there is a fascinating exhibit about the English Martyrs. And we'll tour the oldest functioning Catholic church in England, which survived the Protestant Reformation. Join us for a royally good venture into English Catholic tradition on Extraordinary Faith. Hello, I'm Alex Began, welcoming you to Extraordinary Faith, a program that showcases exciting developments in the growing world of Catholic tradition. This is our 4th episode from London, England, and today we're going to focus on history. We'll take you to the oldest functioning Catholic church in England, a famous convent of nuns, and our first stop, a historic church in a small town that is rediscovering the beauty of traditional liturgy. Enthusiasm for Catholic tradition in England is not restricted just to London. With a history dating to the 11th century, the small town of Hethe is located in the exurbs outside of Oxford. Father Paul Lester is pastor of Holy Trinity Church. Father Lester, how old is this church?
Well, if you look from outside, you would think the church was built many centuries ago, but in fact it was built in 1832 in what we call the Neo-Gothic style. There was a place of Catholic worship in this area before this church was built, many centuries ago, when the Catholic family, the Fermor family, protect and hid priests who said Mass for the people here in times of persecution of Catholics.
Looking around here, this church is beautifully laid out for traditional liturgy.
Well, we're very fortunate here, really, because the priests who were here before me wanted to preserve the rich historical heritage of this church and the immediate area. So that means really not changing anything in any significant manner. The beauty of this church and its history draw people, attract people from not just this area, but from a wider area in this part of northeast Oxfordshire. You see, beauty attracts people. It draws people.
You offer the ordinary form facing the high altar here as well as the extraordinary form.
Yes, of course, as any Catholic priest, diocesan priest, the ordinary rite is the ordinary rite of this parish. Our main parish mass is in the ordinary rite, but we also want to offer to the people the riches of and beauty of the traditional liturgy. I feel that we are particularly lucky here because the priest saying Mass faces the traditional direction of East. This, not only in the traditional liturgy, but in the ordinary liturgy of the Church, gives the focus upon the contemplative aspect of worship, where we don't have to do much. We participate inwardly. It's not about what I can do for God, but what God can do for us through his Son, through the sacrifice of the Mass.
Mother Xavier and Mother Mary Joseph are here to explain things to us. Mother Xavier, tell us first who the Tyburn Nuns are and why they're here.
We are a French foundation from Montmartre in 1897 and 8. And we are a Benedictine congregation, cloistered, and our title shows that we come from Montmartre. But when we came to London in 1901, all the people around about in the neighbourhood said, oh, these are the Tyburn Nuns, because we settled here. And we can't get rid of that name, so everybody calls us the Tyburn Nuns, but it's not our canonical name. We're cloistered Benedictines. We have a typical Benedictine timetable with the Divine Office chanted 7 times a day. Holy Mass is the centre of our life daily, and we also have perpetual adoration with exposition of the Blessed Sacrament for over 108 years now here. And that's mostly what the outside world knows us about. We have a small hospitality wing of the monastery where people who want a quieter time and a prayerful time come to stay.
Let's find out the source of your nickname. What is the Tyburn tree?
The Tyburn tree is, strictly speaking, the gallows at a place called Tyburn, and that was where there was a little river, a twin river that went underneath this area of London and still does. But it was called the tree because it was the gallows where people were hung, condemned by the king to death of hanging, drawing and quartering with great barbarity at this spot. It began here as a gallows, as an elm tree, and the first man was hanged on the elm tree. Then, as the centuries went on, and very many really notorious criminals were hanged and executed here at Tyburn, by the time of Queen Elizabeth I, she re-erected it as a proper gallows with triple uprights and a triple crossbars, and you can see them there. You'll notice that on the cross beams there are words engraved, and they are in, some of them are in Latin, Jesu, 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 esto mihi Jesu. Several martyrs said that. It was a famous prayer. Jesus, 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 be to me a Jesus, that is a saviour, when they were on the scaffold. And the other one is, Jesus, convert England, Jesus, have mercy on this country. And many of the martyrs prayed that before they were hanged. And so it became a kind of a rhythm prayer to say on the scaffold. Psalm 33 or 34, whichever version you take, was another famous and favourite psalm of the martyrs on the scaffold. This altar is constructed along the way, the style of altars of churches of those times. The crucifix is like that has Our Lady and St. John at either side. And that was typical of those times. In the centre here you have 6 Tyburn martyrs and Our Lady, Queen of Martyrs, in the centre, because she is the patroness of all martyrs, the Queen of Martyrs. And each of the martyrs that are there have the symbols or the signs of their martyrdom with them. I'd like to tell you about the first Tyburn martyr. His name is John Houghton, and he was a Carthusian monk along at what today is called the Charterhouse area near Smithfield. John Houghton was the first Tyburn martyr, a Carthusian, a friend of Henry VIII, but he had to give up that friendship for his faith and die for his faith, because he said, I am bound in conscience and am ready and willing to suffer every kind of torture rather than deny a doctrine of the Church. And he also said, I cannot do anything contrary to the law of God and of the church. And another thing, when he said they were torturing him, were similar words. But when Thomas More, who had his cell overlooking where they arrayed the martyrs below on the hurdles to go to their martyrdom, this is what Thomas More said to his daughter Meg when he watched this going on from his own cell. Lo, dost thou not see, Meg, that these blessed fathers be now going to their deaths as cheerfully as bridegrooms to their marriage? Which was quite a startling thing to say in those circumstances. And John Houghton, when they had hanged him and were taking out his inner organs, and they cut him open and pulled out his heart, he should have been dead, but what he said then at that moment were these words up there: "Good Jesus, what will you do with my heart?" And it's for this reason that one of the most famous paintings of John Houghton has him with the noose around his neck and his heart in his hand. The last Tyburn martyr in 1681 was St. Oliver Plunkett. The thing about St. Oliver Plunkett was that he was falsely accused quite blatantly, and when the British authorities brought him here to have him executed, they insisted that he was dressed in his pontifical robes and dragged along to Tyburn like that and hanged like that.
Lastly, could you explain the stained glass in here?
The stained glass here is rather special. Now, this set of windows of the Tyburn martyrs around Christ the King of Martyrs is in fact dedicated to the corporal works of mercy in the lives of the martyrs. And if the windows are examined carefully, you'll see that in the different roundels.
Mother Xavier, how can visitors visit your convent? Do you have open hours here or masses open to the public?
The crypt is open to the public, and we have here 3 set times a day: 10:30, 3:30 and 5:30 p.m, when anybody may come and have a tour of the martyr's crypt. Pilgrims come with priests and they have Mass here. Priests come individually and have Masses. And historical groups, a lot of historical groups come here because of the history of Tyburn. And also we've found from England and London and the southern part of England in recent years, Tyburn has become a very popular place for confirmation groups, because when people are confirmed, we take it that we become strong and perfect Christians, and so martyrs are a witness to that.
One of the guests we'll meet today is a man who has a unique challenge when promoting Latin liturgy in this great city. There are so many Latin Masses on offer here that in order to give people guidance, he has started to grade them. In our last episode, we introduced you to the Latin Mass Society of England and Wales, which promotes the extraordinary form. London also has another organization, the Association for Latin Liturgy, which promotes the ordinary form of the Mass in Latin as well as the extraordinary form. Bernard Marriott is chairman of the ALL. Bernard, in an era when there has been so much growth in celebration of the extraordinary form, why is it important to promote offering the ordinary form in Latin?
There's certainly been an enormous increase in the number of extraordinary form masses in recent years since Pope Benedict liberated the extraordinary form. But it remains a very small proportion of the total number of masses celebrated. You might call it something of a niche market. The association's view is that if we are to get Latin and Gregorian chant and classical polyphony back into churches, then as well as working on the extraordinary form, we should also work on the ordinary form, because that's the normal Mass that most people are familiar with.
Now let's talk about your publications. What are some of the books and other things you've produced?
We publish books for congregations so that when they go to Mass in Latin, they have something before them. It may be music, or it may be the words and a translation. So, for example, we do a series of Mass booklets, one for each of the Gregorian chant Masses. We have 8 or 9 booklets in that series. Then we also do an organ accompaniment for Missa de Angelis, because if a parish is wanting to start with a Mass in Latin, it is very likely to want to sing Missa de Angelis. We also produced a bilingual Latin and English Sunday Missal, and that was the first one to be published in the English-speaking world. So we had the whole of the Latin Missal on one side of the page and the whole of the English Missal corresponding to it on the other side of the page, so that that Missal was of use in either a Latin Mass or an English Mass. Okay. The only thing to be said about that is that when the English translation changed about 4 years ago, that Missal effectively became redundant. So in cooperation with the Catholic Truth Society, we helped them to produce their Sunday Missal, which does very much the same thing, and it also includes the readings. So the Catholic Truth Society now have a bilingual Sunday Missal and a bilingual daily Missal, and this is an enormous step forward.
As a visitor to London, one of the most useful things the ALL provides is the directory of Latin Masses. If nothing else, it highlights just how much Latin Mass activity there is in London, not to mention the rest of England.
One of our publications is not actually printed. It's the only one that isn't. This appears online, and it's our Latin Mass directory. We find out from members where there are Masses in Latin. So in the whole of the country, we have 90 churches listed, 35 of which are in London. And relatively speaking, there are more Latin Masses per head of the population in London than there are in the rest of the country. So we hope this spurs the rest of the country to come up to London's standards.
While most of us in the States struggle to find our nearest Latin Mass, you have so many in London that you actually found a need to grade them to give the visitor guidance. You're the Yelp of churches.
We do have to grade our Masses. We have a grading system that begins with A and goes through B and C. A is a Mass which is almost entirely in Latin, apart from the readings and the intercessions. Grade C at the other end of the spectrum is probably where you have just the ordinary of the Mass, the Kyrie, the Gloria, the Credo in Latin, and the rest in English. And then our category B comes in between A and C.
London does seem to have many more parishes offering the ordinary form in Latin than any other city. Why do you think it's so popular here?
Mass in Latin is more popular in London. When the vernacular was first introduced 50 years ago, I thought to myself that if anywhere went very rapidly to the vernacular, it would be London. It's the metropolis, it's a trendy city, lots of young people. And that it would be the country areas that were, so to speak, behindhand and clung to the Latin. What we found is exactly the opposite. Country areas generally have lost most of their Latin, really. It's the cities, and in particular London. And that has turned out to be due to choirs and singing masses. It's the choirs that have kept the Latin going, because there's so much music. There's the entire repertoire of Gregorian chant. There is the classical polyphony repertoire. All of this was composed in Latin for use in masses that were entirely in Latin. I should mention, actually, I'm very pleased that you asked me to come today, which is the feast of St. Edward the Confessor. And St. Edward the Confessor is the patron of Westminster Cathedral and the Westminster Diocese. So the Mass is a solemnity, and I was able to go to the Latin Mass in the cathedral this morning. There's always one there, and I would recommend it very warmly to anybody in London. 10:30, Westminster Cathedral, any day during the week.
The Catholic Church was outlawed in England from the year 1534 in the time of Henry VIII until 1829. One church, however, managed to survive. St. Etheldreda, hidden down a tiny street in London's present-day financial district. Anthony Weaver is an expert in English church history. Anthony, when was St. Etheldreda founded?
It's built in 1290, Alex, by the bishops of Ely. I don't want you to think that this church lasted without interruption all the way through. That is not possible. The persecution was so horrific that you could never have a church open to the public, a parish church, remaining Catholic. So the only place where the Mass was celebrated without interruption throughout our history are the chapels inside the great houses of the Catholic aristocracy. Places like the home of Lord Camoys, Stoner Park at Henley-on-Thames. This was not, St. Etheldreda's does not have an uninterrupted history. It just wasn't possible when priests are being chopped into 4 pieces. It is possible during the short period when this is the residence of the Spanish ambassador, the Count of Gondomar, because then the chapel enjoys diplomatic immunity. So when you come in here, you're technically coming into Spain. But outside that short period in the reign of James I, Philip III of Spain, this was not uninterrupted Catholic worship.
What took place here during the years of the Reformation?
The Catholic worship is made illegal. The Mass, not under Henry VIII, who technically died Catholic, strange to say. Henry VIII would burn Lutherans, so we mustn't think of him as a Protestant. But he did break the link with Rome, which we had had for more than 1,000 years. So under Edward VI, his son, and under Elizabeth I, just being a priest is illegal. Allowing a priest to sleep in your house is a capital offense. So we have here martyrs who were killed for simply harboring a priest. This is in the reign of Elizabeth. Things got much, much worse after the Spanish Armada of 1588. So being Catholic means being in collusion with a foreign power. Not actually with Rome, but with Spain. And so Catholicism and treachery are closely linked in the English mind. Then, and for some people still now.
Let's talk about the architecture in here. It's rather stark. It almost feels like you're entering the catacombs. What sort of style is this?
This is the upper chapel and was built in 1290 as the chapel of the Bishops of Ely, the beautiful city north of Cambridge. Bishops at this period sit in Parliament. Ely is a great diocese, like the other Lincoln, Winchester, and so forth, and every bishop needs a palace in London. So this is the chapel of the palace of the Bishops of Ely.
Most people have likely never heard of Etheldreda the Saint. Who was she?
Etheldreda was a princess of the royal family of East Anglia. These were kingdoms, East Anglia, Mercia, Northumbria, Wessex, which existed prior to the creation of England in the 7th century. And she was married off twice for political reasons. And with each marriage, she insisted, probably to the chagrin of her husband on each occasion, on a vow of perpetual virginity, chastity, if you like. A bit strange for us within a marriage. Particularly difficult for her second husband, I think, a young man of only 15. But she insisted on it. When he insisted, she ran away and founded the great abbey of Ely, which became, over the centuries, the second richest abbey in England after Glastonbury. It is now Ely Cathedral in the centre of this beautiful city north of Cambridge. Her tomb, which had attracted pilgrims, miracles being worked for centuries, was totally destroyed. But mercifully, 1 or 2 relics were preserved.
Speaking of that, I understand you have a relic of St. Etheldreda.
We do. Most people coming into this church, seeing her statue in the sanctuary, and looking beneath it will see a richly decorated box, which is called a feretory, from the Greek word pharaoh, I carry. This box would have had a pole pushed through the 2 holes at the top and carried in procession for veneration. These days, for security reasons, the relic of her hand is kept in a safe in the sacristy.
Visitors to this church will notice the statues that surround the sides. They have a very different style from most Catholic statues.
Modern. They're very modern. They're 1950s. Remember, there was some bomb damage during the Second World War, and so these statues are 1950s, but they're not at all medieval, any more than our glass is medieval. They represent some of the hundreds of Catholic martyrs, many of whom have been canonized, mostly by Pope Paul VI, and who were executed in odium fidei, for hatred of the faith, between 1535, probably St. Oliver Plunkett, the last one, about 1680. These were the martyrs.
Very much befitting a church of this age, we understand that Latin Masses are a central part of the parish life here.
We have that great tradition, coupled with our great musical tradition of professional choir. But the Mass we have every Sunday at 11 in Latin is not actually in the extraordinary form. It is in the new rite, but said in Latin, which confuses many, many people, because most people think that a Mass in Latin is a tridentine or extraordinary form Mass. It's not technically the case. You can have a new rite Mass in Latin or in any language.
You also, though, do have extraordinary form Masses here on First Fridays.
Yes, they are a group, Latin Mass Society, who come in with their own priest and use this church because of the great affection which they have for it.
When can visitors tour St. Etheldreda?
Visitors are welcome here every day. The opening times are shown on the door from early morning until about 5 in the evening, weekends as well.
Anthony, thank you very much. We hope people will visit here. On our next episode, come with us to New York City, where we'll pay a visit to Sacra Liturgia, one of the world's largest conferences on traditional sacred liturgy. We'll speak with Cardinal Raymond Burke, one of the Church's most enthusiastic advocates of the traditional Mass. We'll talk with some of the conference speakers, including Dom Alcuin Reed, the liturgical scholar who organizes the event. We'll speak with the priest who serves as pastor of one of New York's Dominican parishes, and we'll take you to the traditional pontifical Mass that crowned the conference. The episode pages of our website, extraordinaryfaith.tv, contain more information about every place and person we visit, in case you're curious to learn more. Please also like us on Facebook so you'll always know the latest about our upcoming shows and plans. We'll also keep you posted there about the priests and parishes taking us up on our offer of free training on the Latin Mass. The requests have been proliferating. Thanks for coming along on our journey through Catholic England, and join us on our next episode as we continue to bring you the best of our wonderful Catholic traditions here on Extraordinary Faith.